Well, hello, and greetings from Oxford, where I'm sitting in the library of my home. I wish I could be with you in person. I have such happy memories of times with friends at the ABC² conferences, and I wish I could be with you today, watching you smile, watching you frown if I say something that you don't quite follow, watching you laugh if I say something amusing, and above all, saying together with you the underpinning verse for ABC², the inscription that stands over the main entrance to the Cavendish Laboratory in Cambridge. Great are the works of the Lord, sought out by all them that have pleasure therein. Because that's all saying that the work that we do as scientists is to find out how God makes the world work, and it's an enormously pleasurable activity. And today I want to talk with you about how artificial intelligence is changing scientific research and its implications in academic practice and beyond. In the UK, it's been a bad summer for the public image of algorithms because school pupils were not able to take examinations. The schools had to provide information to the central government authority, which used that through an algorithm to make an estimate of what grades they would have got had they sat examinations, and this then became the basis for who got into what university. And in the UK, there's no more sensitive question than that. The thought that unfair decisions might be based on an errant algorithm caused understandable consternation. The Prime Minister, visiting one school, told the pupils, "I'm afraid your grades were almost derailed by a mutant algorithm." And the fact that algorithms have been used for many decades with widespread acceptance for coping with examination issues ranging from ill health to the rare occasions when a whole school studies the wrong set text for an examination in English literature or a modern language, seems quietly to have slipped under the radar. Algorithmic decision-making is not new. In Hebrew Deuteronomic law, if a man had sex with a woman who was engaged to another man, then this was unconditionally a capital offence for the man. But for the woman, it depended on the circumstances. If it occurred in a city, then she would be regarded as culpable on the grounds that she should have screamed for help and would have been heard. But if it occurred in the open country, then she was presumed innocent, because however loudly she might have cried out, there would have been no one to hear her. So if you like, this is a kind of algorithmic justice. If in city, then woman guilty, else woman not guilty. Now, artificial intelligence is undergoing a transition from classification to decision-making. I find it quite helpful to make a distinction between broad artificial intelligence, what's sometimes called artificial general intelligence, in which machines make their own goals, and this is the subject of gripping movies. You've got movies like Ex Machina or Her. You've got novels like Machines Like Me, and you've got philosophical speculation in books like The Technological Singularity or Superintelligence from my colleague in philosophy here in Oxford, or more recently Humanity 3.0. That is a long way off. Machines actually making setting their own goals in a way that goes beyond or possibly even is in conflict with the intentions of the humans who created them. But what's sometimes called narrow artificial intelligence, or simply AI, is with us now in the form of machine learning. The change that's happened is that whereas in conventional computing the computers were programmed to perform a task, in machine learning the computers are programmed to learn how to perform a task. I actually did this as a schoolboy. We didn't know that it was called machine learning then, but we had an inspirational maths teacher. In fact, I benefited from a series of inspirational maths teachers, and one of them got us to make a computer that would play the game of, well, in English we call it noughts and crosses, and children love it, but eventually they get frustrated with it because a good player can always force a draw. You should never lose. And our computer that we built was learnt how never to lose at noughts and crosses. Now, this was a computer, it had no electronics, no valves, no transistors. We made it out of matchboxes, so small versions of this. And when I was a child, more people smoked, and also there were gas fires in homes, so small matchboxes were rather plentiful. Happily, now few people smoke, and few homes have gas fires anymore. And what we did was to take the matches out and to put a card diagonally in the matchbox, and then into one half of the matchbox we would put different coloured beads, and we'd have a different matchbox for each possible situation in the game. And because it's such a small game, you don't need too many matchboxes to do that. And then for each situation we'd mark on a piece of paper on the matchbox the different possible moves that the machine could make from that state of play. And because of symmetry, there are not very many possible moves. And then we'd allocate a colour to each possible move. And that colour corresponded to the colour of some of the beads in the box. So, for example, if there were 3 different moves, you could have red, green and blue beads, and that would correspond to the 3 possible moves that the machine could make at that point. So what you do is you play a game, maybe you start off, and then you make a move, and then you look at the different matchboxes, or you find the matchbox that corresponds to the play where you've just made a move. Supposing you've put a nought in one corner, for example. And the box has the different possible moves on it, has a bead for each move. So you shake the box, you open it up, and you see which colour bead comes down into the relevant corner. And you play that move. And then, or the machine plays that move, then you play your next move, you see what the situation is, you take the corresponding matchbox, you shake it, and use that to determine what move the machine makes until you complete the game. And now, here's how it goes. If the machine wins that game, and you must have been playing badly if it wins, because you never need to lose, then you reward each of the matchboxes in that sequence with an extra bead of the colour corresponding to the move that the machine made that led to a win. If the machine loses, then you penalise it by removing a bead of that colour from each of the matchboxes in the sequence, so that it's less likely to make that losing move later on. And the point is that as you play a large number of games with the machine, gradually the losing moves become less and less likely because you've been removing the beads, and the winning or drawing moves become more and more probable because you're rewarding those sequences. And so the machine, the computer, if you like, it's only matchboxes, but it's a computer, is learning how to play the game of tic-tac-toe, the game of noughts and crosses, so as not to lose. Now, we're using machine learning now routinely in my laboratory. In my laboratory, we develop components for quantum technologies, and the basic component for quantum computing is a qubit. There are many different physical implementations of a qubit. The one that we develop in my laboratory is it's a very small piece of semiconductor material. Could be silicon, could be gallium arsenide, and we create two quantum dots. These are tiny regions, each of which can contain one electron. And the quantum information is encoded in the relationship between the spins of the two electrons. For those of you who enter these things, they can form a singlet or a triplet, and that can correspond to a 0 or a 1 in quantum information. And you can have a superposition of the 0 and the 1s, and that's what gives quantum computing its extraordinary potential. But these are very small, and they're very difficult to tune up. We cool them down to a temperature that's colder than anywhere that we know of in the universe outside the laboratory. It's about a 50th of a degree above absolute zero, 20 millikelvin. And the regions are a few tens of nanometers across. A nanometer is a billionth of a meter. And it's quite hard to tune them up so that they will exhibit the quantum properties that are so crucial to the quantum technologies. A human can do it, well, if they're very experienced, they can do it in a few hours. A new graduate student might take days, or in the worst case, even weeks to do it. We have used machine learning in the laboratory to let the machine get better and better and better at tuning these devices up. And the machine can now do it routinely, well, in about 12 minutes. So the machine learning is actually proving to be of practical significance in the laboratory. The students now, none of them want to do it by hand anymore. They want the machine to do it. One student rather memorably put it like this. He said, it's as if all your life you've been washing your shirts in the bathtub with a bar of soap. And it's rather tedious, it takes quite a lot of time, but it's the only way to get your shirts clean, so you do it as cheerfully as you can and sing to yourself while you're doing it. Until one day you acquire a washing machine. And then all you need to do is to put the shirts in the washing machine, put some detergent in, shut the door, press the on switch, and you can go away and do something else for a couple of hours, and you come back and your shirts are all clean. And you never want to go back again to cleaning your shirts by hand in the bathtub. And none of the students in the lab want to go back to tuning up these very delicate quantum devices by hand ever again. They all want to use the machine learning because it's faster and better than a human is. And there have been various demonstrations of the superiority of machine learning over humans for specific tasks. You may remember the case a little over 4 years ago when the machine AlphaGo played one of the leading world champions at Go, Lee Sedol, in a match of 5 games, and in the end the machine won by 4 games to 1, so it was finely balanced, but the machine won. In the second game, in about the 37th move, the machine did something so surprising that Lee Sedol scarcely knew how to react. It was a situation where the machine, a normal human would have put a stone down in either row 3 or row 4. Row 3 probably would gain more territory. Row 4 would probably gain more power and therefore eventually more territory. And in fact, AlphaGo put the stone down in column 5, which was an astonishing move and it won the game. And this was later regarded, well, in the marvelous sort of Korean way of talking about it, they described it as a divine move. The point was that the machine was doing something that was a creative step, an inventive step that few humans would have been likely to make. And so we have the question as to how might that play out in scientific research. The same year, the head of the Sony Computer Science Laboratories, Hiroki Kitano, published a marvelous challenge. And the challenge was for artificial intelligence to win the Nobel Prize. He called it Creating the Engine for Scientific Discovery. And the article said that this article proposes a new grand challenge for AI research, to develop an AI system to make a major scientific discovery in biomedical sciences that is worth a Nobel Prize. And earlier this year I talked to him about that. In fact, we had a whole meeting about it in London. In what ways might that be possible? What might it mean for a artificial intelligence to make a discovery? And perhaps a way to think about that is to step back from science and think about other ways in which machine learning is making and could make an impact in other areas of life, and then come back to scientific discovery later. There are a number of areas where machines are already demonstrating superior performance to humans. I've given you some examples, but let's take it to medicine. There's a number of radiological studies in which machine learning applied to scans performs better than humans do by objective measures that are well documented. There was a paper, a letter to Nature, an article in Nature early this year, showing how robustly those studies were done. So now, let's suppose, which is likely to be the case, that the successes in machine learning applied to radiology become more and more useful and more demonstrated in other areas of medicine. And I don't know what it's like in Brazil, but here in the UK, when people go to their GP, they now find that quite a lot of the time of the consultation, the GP is actually looking things up on her computer or his computer to find the most accurate and up-to-date information. Machines are very good at that sort of thing. Would you want to be treated by a machine that knew less than your doctor? So hands up. If I was with you, I'd say hands up everybody who would like to be treated by a machine that knew less than their doctor, and I don't think any hands would go up. So now, would you like to be treated by a doctor that knew more than their machine? And probably all your hands would go up. So now let's turn the question the other way around, you see. Would you like to be treated by a doctor who knew less than the machine? And that's a rather harder question. And you might pause, and we could see how many hands would go up for yes or no for that question. But then you might reject the question altogether. You might say, actually, that's not the choice we're faced with. The real question is, would I rather be treated by a doctor who's not making use of machine learning, or by a doctor who's making full use of machine learning? So now we can apply it to a slightly harder case, which is of sentencing in courts. And in the UK, at least, there was a recognition starting about 20 years ago, that there were considerable inconsistencies in the sentence that people would get for apparently similar circumstances, depending on who the judge was. It even came down to depending on where they lived. It's what the newspapers at the time liked to call a postcode lottery. The sentence someone who's convicted would get for a given crime would depend where in the country they lived. And this problem was recognized to be so serious that in 2009 Parliament decided to set up a sentencing council, which was actually formed in 2010, which then prescribed what the sentence should be according to various criteria which the judge was required to take into account in deciding the sentence. So let me give you an example. In the UK, in the case of rape, the guidelines have their starting point like this, that if it's a single offence of rape by a single offender, then there should be 5 years of custody if the victim is 16 years of age or over, 8 years custody if the victim is 13 years or over but under 16, and 10 years for a victim under 13. And then if the rape is accompanied by an aggravating factor, such as abduction, or the offender aware that they have a sexually transmitted infection or abuse of trust, then it's 8 years if the victim is 16 or over, 10 years if the victim's 13 or over but under 16, and 13 years if the victim's under 13 years old. And then repeated rape of the same victim by a single offender, or a rape involving multiple victims, it's 15 years custody. But all of these that I've given you are only the starting point. In each case, the maximum penalty is life imprisonment. So you see, there's already something that's beginning to it's beginning to look like an algorithm that the human judges are required to follow. But human judging in courts is still subject to variability, like any human endeavour. And if you want proof of that, the empirical proof of the uncertainty involved in judgments of courts of law is that when cases go to appeal, they're sometimes successful. In other words, the appeal court is coming to a different conclusion from the court that previously tried the case. So now, let us suppose that, as has happened in radiology, the machine, using techniques of machine learning, becomes rather good at predicting what a human judge would decide in a case. In fact, let's suppose that the machines predict it with greater consistency than human judges would, presented with the same evidence. So now we can go through the same set of questions, you see. Would you, if you were a victim, or if you were responsible for law, would you want the judgment to be made by a machine that's less consistent than a human? So again, put your hands up, it's easy. The answer is no, all right? So now you turn the question the other way around. Would you prefer for the judgment to be made by a human that's less consistent than a machine? And as with the doctor, that's a bit of a harder question, because we feel somehow that decisions involving human freedom ought to be made by other humans. So now you can ask a third question, which is a different question, and it's would it be better for the judgment to be made by a judge that's not making use of machine learning, or a judge that is making use of machine learning? Earlier this summer, with colleagues here at Oxford, we produced a report called Citizenship in a Networked Age. And this arose out of a larger project which was all about promoting human flourishing through the best of scientific insight and spiritual wisdom. And in fact, I'm just finishing with a colleague called Michael Rice a book on that topic, which will be published by Oxford University Press next year. Who knows whether one day ABC² might get it translated into Portuguese. We'd planned a series of launches for this report over the summer. Because of the COVID pandemic, we weren't able to have them in person. But we did have one virtual one we had a number of virtual ones actually. The one that would have been for real in China. And a couple of weeks ago we did it as a virtual launch. And the video of that is available for anybody who wants to look. The website is just called Citizenship in a Networked Age, all one word, .org. And it was actually marvellous. The panel that was convened to discuss the report consisted of Chinese scholars in a range of interdisciplinary fields at different stages in their careers. And the panel was chaired by the Dean of the Law School at Tsinghua University, whose name is Weijing Shen. And he is a professor of computing law. And his current big project in China, funded by the Chinese government, is machine learning for judges in China. And he explained to me the need for this. It is that judges in China, on average, have to adjudicate on something like 500 cases per judge per year. And that's an unsustainable load. And so he's got a major project to consider how machine learning might support judges in their responsibilities for decision making in court. So now, I maybe I hear you. If I was in the room, maybe I'd hear you. Maybe over cyberspace, I can imagine you, as it were, sucking the air through your intellectual teeth and saying, I'm a bit worried about all this. You know, the machines taking over society. What are the concerns that we ought to have? Well, we address a number of those concerns in this report. But let me just suggest what a couple of those concerns might reduce to, all right? One may be that, at least in deep neural networks, the decision-making may be only as good as the data on which the machines have been trained. Supposing, as is indeed the case in the USA, machine learning is used to decide on parole cases, who should be granted parole, if the data on which the machines have been trained contains a higher degree of recidivism for certain ethnic backgrounds, then when a case comes up, people from that ethnic background may be disadvantaged by the machines in ways that have nothing apart from their ethnicity to do with the actual case in which they're involved. And assuming that we want to say, well, the ethnicity is not relevant to this decision, then the machine is building in a bias because of the data on which it's been trained. Now, this is not a problem unique to machines. Humans also are capable of racial bias. That's why in the UK, and I anticipate in other countries as well, all of us involved in recruitment in the UK have to undergo hidden bias training to try to expose biases that may be hidden, that we're not recognized of, so that we can address them and deal with them. So this is an issue that humans have to deal with in a year where we've had the Black Lives Matter movement. We scarcely need reminding of that. And just as it can be addressed in humans, so it can be addressed in machines as well. Another source of unease may be the use to which machine learning is put for commercial and political ends. If you think that machine learning is not already applied to you, you're probably mistaken. Almost every time you do an online search or use social media, the machine is collecting data about you. It's harvesting what's sometimes called your data exhaust, and it's amazing how quickly and how accurately the machines learn about you. And even if you think you've switched off cookies and so on, which is almost impossible to do completely actually, even if your service provider is using what's called end-to-end encryption, it can still harvest metadata about you. And it can use those data to target you for commercial ends, but also for political ends. And who knows how much in the next 2 or 3 weeks before the American election, the machines are targeting individuals to seek to influence their opinion about who they will vote for. And in the commercial world, some of the big data companies are employing some of the best minds in the world and paying them some of the highest salaries in the world for tasks as simple as maximizing your screen time. So they want you to be as addicted as possible to the screen, because then they can maximize the advertisements that they can target at you and your interests and seek to influence your purchasing. So that's another cause for concern. And in the report on citizenship in a networked age, we're seeking to identify ways in which citizens can be alert to these influences and can best protect themselves against them. In some ways, advances in machine learning are acting as a sort of canary in the mind, alerting us to fundamental questions about what humans are for and what it means to be human. The old model of humans that's widely used in conventional economics is Homo economicus, in which it's supposed that humans are rational and selfish and greedy and lazy. And there's an increasing move in the economic sciences to suggest that has passed its sell-by date and should be replaced by what I like to call Homo fidelis, ethical, caring, generous, energetic woman and man. I talked at the start about artificial general intelligence, in which the machine decides on its own goals and values. Well, that's going to remain, I think, science fiction for a very long time, though it's right to be alert to the dangers of it in the long term. But for the foreseeable future, it's up to humans, in other words, us, to determine what values the machines are to implement. And if we get it right, the technologies of the machine learning age will provide new opportunities for Homo fidelis to promote human flourishing at its best. So like so many other technologies, another one would be gene synthesis, and you can think of your own, that raise ethical questions. Of course, the detailed ethical questions are specific to that technology. But the deeper you go, the more you find that ultimately you're asking questions about human flourishing and what it means for humans to flourish and why we're here. For a believer, that means asking what God's like and how he can be known and what he expects of us. Christians have been thinking about what it means to be human for 2 millennia, building on what came before. And so they ought to have something to contribute on how humans flourish. In a book where we had the Brazilian, or the South American launch actually, 2 years ago at the ABC conference in Recife, my co-authors and I asked our readers to imagine they were writing about 3,000 years ago for people who knew nothing about modern genetics or psychological science, and writing about what it means to be human. Here's what we wrote. You're writing for a storytelling culture, and so you'd probably put it in the form of a story. Let's say you set it in a garden. The garden is pleasant, but it's also designed for character formation, and so there's work to do, and also the possibility for a hard moral choice. You want to convey that humans need social interactions for the same reason that solitary confinement is a severe punishment, and so you try the literary thought experiment of having one solitary man and letting him encounter animals and name them. Animals can be useful and they can be good company, but ultimately no animals, not even a cat, are fully satisfactory as partners in work and companions in life. Humans need humans. An enriching component of human relationship is sex, so the supreme gift of the solitary man in our story is companionship with an equal who's both like and unlike a woman. It's hardly a good account, but it's a start. Oh, and there's one other aspect. They should be free of the shame which lives at the root of so much psychological disorder. Sorry, I should have said it's hardly a complete account, but it's a good start. Now, as far as it goes, would you regard such an account as complete? If not, what would you add next? Well, you can see where this is going. To be human, you need to be responsible. So you let the humans face the moral choice. You can even include an element of disinformation to make the choice harder. And then when it goes horribly wrong, you let them discover that they're responsible for their actions, and that blaming one another doesn't help. If you have God in your story, then uniquely for the humans, responsibility consists of accountability to God. And this is how human uniqueness and distinctiveness was addressed in early Jewish thought. And in my view, as an early articulation that to be human means to be responsible, the story of Adam and Eve is unsurpassed. My next door neighbour here in Oxford is a very distinguished economist, Sir Paul Collier, and he referenced this report on citizenship in a networked age in an excellent book that came out this summer called Greed is Dead. And he wrote, whatever the future capabilities of machines, they cannot be morally load-bearing because humans are self-aware and mortal, whereas machines are not. Machines can be used not only to complement and enhance human decision-making, but also for bad. Search optimization has already morphed into influence optimization. We must keep morally pertinent decision-making firmly in the domain of humanity. And the nature of humanity includes responsibility, and for wise machine learning and for much more besides. And, accountability is part of life for people with widely differing philosophical and ethical and religious worldviews. And if we're willing to concede that accountability follows responsibility, then we should ask next, accountable to whom? Now, let me bring this back, if I may, to the motto of ABC² and to scientific research. So the wonderful motto, the works of the Lord are great, sought out of all them that have pleasure therein. How can machine learning help us in the task of finding out how God makes the world work? If a unique attribute, a distinctive attribute of humans is responsibility, then I think close behind comes as a distinctive human attribute comes understanding. We know of no other species that is capable of understanding at the level that humans are, and is capable of passing that understanding on to others, and indeed in a healthy way of challenging understanding and thereby refining it. And so it may be that one of the concerns, I've talked about some of the concerns that people have about machine learning in medicine and in law courts. I could extend that to political decision making. Indeed, we do in the report. But now, why do people have concerns when machine learning is used in science? And I think that the feeling is the fear that it might exclude understanding. In other words, if you give the machine vast amounts of data, it can apply its techniques to learn about the data and to learn to make predictions. And they may be extremely accurate predictions. And machine learning is being used in just that kind of way by colleagues here in Oxford to make predictions about electronic structure in a way that would previously been done using techniques like density functional theory. And the machine learning, in some cases, turns out to be much, much more computationally efficient than some of the mean field theories that have been so developed and so refined over the years. And so the fear that people have is, well, okay, the machine can take the data, it can make predictions that may be very reliable, they may be very accurate, they may be very useful. But how does that help you to understand the science of the processes that are going on? I think that's the concern. And it's a legitimate concern, and that it's one that needs to be faced. But I'm convinced that it need not be so, okay? That actually what we're finding in the laboratory is not that the machines stop us thinking, but that they set us free to do more useful thinking. One of the slogans a colleague of mine uses is that the machine learning takes the robot out of the human. So just as all sorts of other automation can have their dangers, an autopilot in an aeroplane can have as a danger, as we saw with the Air France crash in the Atlantic some years ago. But most of the time it's not like that. Most of the time the autopilot is setting the pilots free for concentrating on other decision making. And similarly, I think in science we're going increasingly to find that the machines are setting humans free to do the deeper thinking, the more conceptual thinking. And this is taking place in the context of machine learning already being very well established for classifying data. It's already widely used for that. And this transition that we're making in our laboratory, and others are making too, to the machine being used to take decisions about what the next measurement should be. And you know, through the history of science, people have used instruments as a way of enhancing their ability to study God's world. It was certainly true here in Oxford in the 17th century, and it's another whole story, but in the 17th century there was a strong motivation for science, as they understood it, to recover the knowledge that Adam would have had before the fall. Prelapsarian knowledge, they called it. And whether you articulate your motivation quite like that, or articulate it as we do in the motto of ABC², Psalm 111 verse 2, great are the works of the Lord, sought out of all them that have pleasure therein. I think God loves the technologies that he gives us, and I think he wants us to use them to study his world and to celebrate that, to enjoy it, and in response to turn in worship and praise and awe and wonder to the God who is responsible for it all. I wish I could be with you for a question and discussion session. I wish we could go off to lunch together after this. That's not to be, but I wish the whole work of ABC² well, and God bless you in it. Goodbye.